Hello, and welcome to session 2 of the lab covering muscle identification. So to begin with, what you should have in front of you is this handout right here. So it says Key to Muscles, series of pictures. This is something that you're going to need. If you don't have it, go ahead and put me on hold right now and go download it from Canvas. The other thing that you're going to need is two markers, one red and one blue. So I'm going to use this pink color and this blue color to mark the areas of the origin and insertion. So origin will be in red and insertion will be in blue. And that's how we're going to handle this. So let's go ahead and begin. And starting with the first page here. So I'm waiting for you to come back and with all the necessary stuff. And 1, 2, 3, and hold. And we will begin. All right, so the first muscle what we're going to talk about is orbicularis oculi. So orbicularis oculi, and let's go ahead and highlight that because it's kind of hidden right there. Orbicularis oculi. Now, as you know, the name contains information. Orbicularis, meaning around, and oculi refers to the eye. So this is a muscle around the eye. And here you can see in this image right here, it's there. I'm going to use a yellow highlighter just to bring that into focus a little bit. There it goes there. And there's actually one a little bit on this side too. You can see it right here. That's the orbicularis oculi. Okay. And let's go ahead and get the information that we need for that muscle first, and then I'll show you some more images, and we'll talk about origin, insertion, and action. So origin is going to be the medial wall of orbit. Insertion will be the medial wall of orbit. We're getting the information down now. We're going to talk about it. We're just writing it down now. Action closes the eye. So that's the information. Let me go ahead and show you some images from a couple other sources. So your textbook on page 337 has this image here, which is a pretty decent image actually of all the muscles, the superficial muscles anyway, that you're going to be learning in one complete diagram. And then on the next page, 338, there's the posterior view. You should be looking at this and finding these muscles as we go through. I'm going to be looking at more specific pages, images, but most of the muscles, the vast majority of the muscles that we are actually going to be learning will be seen on both of these images. So just be aware that that's there. It's a good place to look and just get you a sense of where these muscles are located on the body. Okay? But for right now, what we're talking about is this muscle that surrounds the eye. And there it is very, very clearly. Right there. Goes all the way around the eye. And when this muscle contracts, that opening in the center, which is the eye, closes. So this is how you close your eyes. Notice that, and this is important, notice that the action is simply closes, doesn't open the eye. We have other muscles that open the eye. This simply closes the eye. Now, to put in the information on the skeleton where we are looking at, so we would have origin and insertion right next to each other, just like that. And what would happen is this muscle would go all the way around the eye like this. Okay? Orbicularis oculi. All right, the next one, which is on the second page. So let's go to the second page. Is orbicularis oris. Once again, we've got that word orbicularis, meaning around. In this case, oris refers to the mouth. So it's a muscle around the mouth. This is a terrible image here, but nevertheless, you can see that muscle right here. We can also see it right there. Okay. So that's the orbicularis oris. And the action closes and protrudes the lips. So closes and protrudes lips. Okay. Closes and protrudes the lips. So this is often called the kissing muscle, because when you use this muscle, the lips are already closed, and you constrict this muscle even more, the lips pop out as if you're wanting to kiss somebody. Okay, so orbicularis oris closes and protrudes the lips. Oculi docles. Let's move on to the next muscle, which is the masseter muscle. And we have some information that we need here for the masseter muscle. We'll start with origin, and that's going to be the maxilla and the zygomatic arch. That's the origin. The insertion is the angle and ramus of the mandible. So these are both structures that you had to learn when you were looking at bones. Many of the structures that I had you learn were in fact, or are in fact, going to be things that you're seeing here when we study the muscles, or later on when you study other soft tissue. The action is elevates mandible. What does that mean? It means it raises the mandible up. Okay, so we have a couple of pictures for that. Let's start with this one. Again, this is from Netter, our friend. So here is a very nice image of that. So this is, as you can see, the masseter muscle. Okay, and as you can see, it running along this region here, and the zygomatic arch. So maxilla, which is the upper bone, forms the upper jaw, and the zygomatic arch, which is part of the zygomatic bone here. Okay, and into actually the temporal bone, looks like, and then it comes down and inserts. So this area right here is where it inserts on the jaw. So it's along here, all along this edge, and then inserts down onto that surface right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and highlight that. So we'll need red for origin, and we're going to do this. So there's my origin. Okay, and then my insertion is going to be there. So red for origin, blue for insertion. And then on this model, we see it right here. Okay. And on this model, we see it right, or on this picture, we see it right there. So that is the masseter muscle. Elevates the mandible, lift this up. So that's origin, that stays still. This is the part that moves. So we're lifting jaw up this way. Okay. All right. The next muscle is going to be the temporalis muscle, the temporalis muscle. So let's take a look at that. And first of all, let's get the information written down that we need. Temporalis muscle, origin is the temporal bone. The insertion is going to be the coronoid process. And the ramus of the mandible. Okay. Coronoid process and the ramus of the mandible. And the action is elevates and retracts the mandible. Elevates and retracts the mandible. Okay, so let me get a couple of good pictures of that. And we're coming back to this original picture here. The one we used. Here is the temporal bone, and there is the temporalis muscle. So it has this vague, sweeping origin on the skull. As you see, it comes down and inserts here. Remember that shark fin structure that we looked at? That's where this muscle is attaching itself, is to that structure right there. Okay, so you notice that some of the fibers are coming back in this direction or at this angle. So if I can isolate these, and you can isolate different parts of the muscle. You're not aware that you're doing that per se, but you want to produce a certain movement, and your brain will transfer that or transform that into information to these fibers here, and so they'll pull on the jaw backwards in this direction. That's the retraction part, but also elevating the jaw too. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that into our drawing. So red for origin, and unfortunately I didn't give us a good picture here, so I'm just going to do this. Basically it's this. So that's something I need to work on and change for next year. Better picture there, all along this area right there. Okay, so red for origin, blue for insertion, and blue is going to be right here, this. So it's basically all of this area here. Okay, and that's our temporalis muscle, and in the image, and this is the temporalis muscle, all of this. Okay, and the insertion of this muscle is hidden by the masseter muscle. So this muscle, I'm going to use this as an additional aid. So this muscle is sitting this part on the bone, and then it passes through this opening. So the zygomatic arch creates this opening here, and those muscle fibers are coming down here, and they're attaching then to this structure right here. Whereas the masseter muscle is all along here and here, okay, along this edge here, and inserting onto this area right there. Okay. The orbicularis oculi is from here around, and then the orbicularis oris is surrounding the lips here. Okay. Whoa, cool. Sorry about that. Got carried away. All right, so that's it. Let's move on. The next structure, or the next muscle that we're going to look at, is the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and the name tells you everything that you need to know about this muscle, but let's go ahead and put in the information. So the origin is the manubrium, clavicular head, and medial third and I got those two, my dyslexia popping up. All right, so medial third of clavicle. Okay. Manubrium, clavicular head, and medial third of the clavicle. The insertion is the mastoid process. Of temporal bone. And the action, and we have two actions here. So number one, bilateral contraction. What does that mean? That means both of the muscles are contracting simultaneously. So bilateral contraction. And we're going to get a flexing of the neck. So the neck is bent forward in this direction. The second action is unilateral, meaning only one muscle contracts. And there you're going to get lateral, or laterally flex the neck and head to the same side and rotate to opposite side of contracting muscle. So, if I do both muscles, my head flexes. The neck flexes like this. Okay? If I only do one, so if I shorten that muscle, okay, I can flex, okay? So I'm shortening this distance and I'm rotating the head. Okay. So let's do the origins and insertions. Well, first of all, let's highlight. Okay. So here is the muscle here. Here is the muscle here. And here we have a nice picture of it right there. So you can see it's got kind of two heads here, and one of those heads is sitting on the clavicle and the other one is sitting on the manubrium, and it comes up to the mastoid process right there. Okay. And so we can highlight, so red is origin, and we're going to do this up here for the origin. There it is. Okay. And then the insertion, which is blue. Right there. Okay. All right, sternocleidomastoid muscle. The next muscle that we want to look at is not going to be the deltoid muscle. We're going to save that for the second, or the third, presentation. So let's skip the deltoid and the next one, which is the pectoralis major muscle. We'll skip these two. We're going to come back to them, but I want to do them at the same time we do the back muscles. So what I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to look at a series of muscles that are part of the trunk, but are not superficial, or many of them, most of them are not superficial in nature. So I'm going to focus on those, and that's going to be the end of this presentation. And then the next presentation will be the superficial muscles of the anterior and posterior trunk. And then the next one would be arms, and then the following that would be the legs. All right, so let's do these, which are the external obliques, the internal obliques, and transverse abdominis. Let's get our information first. So starting with the external oblique, we just simply need the action for external oblique, and this is going to be compress, the abdomen, and flex the vertebral column. External obliques. So flexing the vertebral column is bending over like doing a sit-up. Internal obliques, you're going to see pretty much the same thing. Compress the abdomen and flex the vertebral column. And I should actually add this. So laterally, rather than just simply flexing the vertebral column, it's going to flex it laterally to the side, okay, in both cases. Okay. The action is for the transverse abdominis is simply compress the abdomen. So I just want to emphasize this because this is kind of important. So I want to laterally, I didn't write that down originally, but I want to just make sure you see that laterally, not, sorry about that, not flexing the vertebral column, which is a bending or a sit-up type movement, but laterally to the side. Okay, for both the external and internal oblique. Okay. And let's go ahead and find them. So here, the external, let's do that in yellow. This is the outside, and you can see it's got this oblique orientation, like this. Okay. So that's my external. Let's just go ahead and label that in this case. Okay. And then the internal oblique, the fibers here, as you can see, the fibers are oriented in this direction. That's my external. But the internal oblique is, the fibers are running in the opposite direction. And so they've cut a square or a rectangle out of the internal obliques in order to see the transverse, which is underneath. But these fibers are running in this direction. So these fibers run in that direction. So that is my internal oblique. Okay. And the transverse, which I'll do in orange, there, those fibers are running in this direction. And so that's the transverse. Abdominis. So let's see if we can find some good pictures of that. I'm going to go ahead and use Netter again. I just kind of really like him. So, let's see. This is the internal, because the fibers are running this direction. The external has been cut, and that would be running in this direction, okay, in this direction. So this is my internal obliques. You can see them running in that direction, so there would be a crisscross pattern. The external would be this direction, internal would be that direction. Okay. And then the transverse, which this picture is not showing, would be back and forth like a belt kind of arrangement. See if I have something along those lines, and I don't. Let me go ahead and see what your textbook offers. So your textbook has a number of pictures. Let's go see what they have. Here is basically the same drawing that we just saw before, except that they're showing us the external oblique here, okay? And then the internals are on this side. So they would be crisscrossing like this. And then the transverse is running that way across the belly. Here is another image. So you'll notice that the deepest is transverse, then internal, and then external, in terms of the layering of these muscles on top of each other. And let's see, I think that's going to be it. So, yeah. Okay. So, and all you had to know with those was the actions. All right. The next set of muscles is going to be the rectus abdominis. And let's go ahead and get the information for that muscle, the rectus abdominis. And the origin is the pubic crest. And pubic symphysis. And the insertion is the cartilage of ribs 5 through 7 and xiphoid process. And the action is compress the abdomen and flex vertebral column. And we're going to add forward to indicate the movement like a sit-up. So origin is going to be red. So on this model, it's going to be all along here. Okay. So there are two muscles, and we'll talk about that when we look at the pictures. So one on this side and one on the other side. So it'd be literally two muscles split right down the center there. And then the insertion, which is going to be blue. Let's count our ribs. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, 6, and 7. And then the xiphoid process. Okay. So it's going to be this pattern like this. and I'm only going to draw one side on this. Okay, so let's take a look at some pictures. Again, I'm coming back to Netter. Here's the muscle in question right here. And it looks like there may be 1, 2, 3, 4 muscles there, but it's not. It's one long muscle. And these so-called tendinous intersections, they're called tendinous inscriptions here. Your textbook has a different term. So textbook is using tendinous intersections. Doesn't matter what you call them. What it is, this is connective tissue, and it is like a rubber band around a ponytail. So we're collecting all the muscle fibers that make up this muscle and holding them together in a bunch as the muscle travels up the length from origin to insertion. Okay, so that's why we get these bands here. And this just gives you your so-called six-pack. At least I've been told that. I don't know. Never seen mine. So there it is, tendinous intersections, but it is not making separate muscles. It's one complete muscle, and it's simply acting as a rubber band holding those fibers together so they don't spread out. Okay, let's see. That's the rectus abdominis. And then we have two more to talk about for this session, and then this session is done. And that's the external and internal intercostals. And here they are, external and internal intercostals. Let's begin with the external, the information that we need. So, the origin, the inferior border of rib above, and I'm going to put this in big letters. Okay, inferior border of rib above. The insertion is the superior border of rib below. Okay. And the action is to elevate or elevation of ribs for inhalation. Okay. So let's just go ahead and put in the information for the next one, which is the internal intercostals. And here the origin is going to be the superior border of the rib below, and the insertion is the inferior border of rib above. So just notice that they're flipping. So this is for origin, we have above, origin we have below. Okay. For insertion, we have below and here above. So they're simply flipping their origin and insertion. They sit in between the ribs. So on one side I will do the externals, and on the other side I will do the internals. But let's go ahead and see if we can get a good, decent picture of this. And where did my good, decent pictures go? Here we go. Here's one. And if we just focus right here. So here are my externals. They are more superficial. and notice the fibers are running in this direction. And then the internals are opposite. They're running in this direction. Okay. Oops, and I forgot to put down the action. So thank you very much. Internals. The action is going to be contraction of ribs and I'm forced exhalation. Okay, so let's do a little highlighting here. So here it's, sorry, wrong color. Let's do blue. So here it's exhalation. Here it's inhalation. But notice that in this case, we're adding a term, forced. So this requires a little bit of an explanation. So both of these muscles are involved in breathing. One is involved with inhalation, bringing the air into your lungs. The other is involved with the exhalation, forcing the air out again. We're going to see another muscle in just a bit called the diaphragm that's also involved, but we're focusing on these two first. So what happens during breathing is you use your muscles to breathe in. And what you're going to do is you're going to expand the chest cavity. You're making the chest cavity bigger. So the muscles that are involved are the eexternals and the diaphragm, which you see right here. So when this muscle contracts, it drops down, thus creating a bigger space here. When these muscles are used, the ribs separate and the chest gets bigger, right? So elevation of the ribs versus contraction of the ribs. So elevation would do this, and contraction would do that. Okay. When you do this, when you expand those ribs, this whole chest cavity gets bigger. And when it gets bigger, I have an image to help us visualize this. When it gets bigger, when the chest cavity gets bigger, so this is the diaphragm, it's dropping, and the ribs are expanding out. So this space is now bigger. And the ribs, as you will learn through a series of different structures, are literally attached to the ribs and to the diaphragm. So when this expands, the lungs expand. Now, there is a gas law, which you'll learn about, which essentially says that when a volume of space enlarges and maintains the same amount of gas, then pressure in that container drops. In other words, when you expand the lungs, the air inside the lungs has a larger space to sit in, and pressure will drop. And when the pressure inside the lungs drops below atmospheric pressure, air flows down through the airways and into the lungs. So when you breathe in, you're simply expanding the space of your lungs to the point where the pressure inside the lungs, the air pressure inside your lungs, drops below atmospheric pressure and air flows into your lungs. Now, there's a lot of elastic tissue built into this whole system. And so when the muscles that expanded the chest relax, just like a rubber band, when you expand a rubber band and you relax the pressure, the rubber band collapses back to its original shape. And the same thing happens here. You put work in to expand the lungs, then you relax those muscles, and all the elastic quality built into the system will bring the chest cavity back to its original shape. So in normal quiet breathing, which most of you do most of your lives, in fact, all of you do all of your lives, even if you're a well-trained athlete, most of your time is spent just normal breathing. And so during that process, you're only using muscles to open up and bring air in, and then you relax the muscles and everything collapses on itself. You don't have to put any work into breathing out. If you start exercising, however, then you need to move the air in and out of your lungs at a higher rate. And so you're still using the muscles to expand, but now you're going to use muscles to collapse so that that process is faster. So you breathe in, out, in, out, in, out. And that's where the internal intercostals come into play, because that's why we have the word forced exhalation. That's heavy breathing when you're exercising. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and let's do the externals on this side. So we'll just mark that so we keep track of what we're doing. We're going to do externals on this side, and we're going to do internals here. Okay. And remember our color combination, red for origin and blue for insertion. So origin is red. So the inferior border of the rib above, the inferior border of the rib above, inferior border of the rib above. Okay. The insertion is the superior border of the rib below. So that's above, this is below. So blue, blue, and blue. Okay. That's for your externals. Sorry, this keeps going in and out. Let's do the internals now. The superior border of the rib below. The superior border of the rib below. Here is the superior border. Okay. Superior border of the rib below. So here is the rib below and superior border, and superior border. And then the inferior border of the rib above. So that would be here, and here, and here. And we get this flipped. Okay. So we're going to get this pattern versus this pattern. Actually, I just blew it. So it's going to be actually, let's see, it's going to be going this way. It's going to be going this way, and this is all, so forget this. Made a mistake here. It's going to be actually this pattern here, because this is the internal. I forgot this was internal side. So that's the external would be going this way towards the center of the body. Hope I didn't confuse you. Okay, so this is going from here to here in that direction, and that's going in this direction. They crisscross each other. And the same would be on this side. Okay. The last muscle we're going to do in this session is going to be the diaphragm. And the diaphragm, we only need the action. Oh, let's do that. The action is inhalation. This is the muscle that does most of the work. And that is why you will always hear breathe from the diaphragm. What they're referring to is this muscle right here. Okay. That's the diaphragm. Got a number of different pictures of that. So basically, we're seeing it, only half of it. It's a dome-shaped muscle. Goes across there. Okay. So we've seen it in a number of different views. This view here. There's the diaphragm. Okay. And let's see if I think I have some others. Yes. So here's the diaphragm. with all the soft tissue and internal organs removed. So you can see it's a dome-shaped structure. There's some holes in here through which certain things pass through. The vena cava is one of those things that pass through. So there's a hole for that because this is the abdominal region here. There's a hole for the aorta, and this would be for the esophagus into the stomach would be sitting right here. So that's another view of that right there. Okay. I think your textbook might have, yeah, your textbook has a couple of images too. This is on page 356. So this is superior view. So we're looking from the point of view of the thoracic cavity down on the top of the dome, if you will. Okay. So here's my heart, for example. And the lungs would be sitting right here and here. Okay. And then this is inferior view, so we're looking back up. Now we're in the abdominal cavity, looking back up towards the thoracic cavity, and there it is right there. And that's inhalation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this session, and I will come back in a couple of other sessions. The next session we're going to do the trunk muscles, but the superficial ones. So pectoralis major, and a couple of other muscles that are part of the trunk. That will be relatively short. And then we'll do the arms in another session and the legs in a fourth session. So I will see you there.